Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to make asphalt materials. We know that usually when we do exterior renderings, the roads and streets are going to be in the foreground of the image, the cameras are going to be low on the ground, and so it's necessary that we put as much detail as possible in these roads so that our images look realistic and interesting. So today I'm going to review how I created this material here. It's a bit of a wet aged asphalt with all its nooks and crannies. And the idea is not that you replicate the material exactly, but rather that you familiarize yourself with some of the tools that we have in Vray and in 3D Studio Max to generate complex materials such as this one. So with that being said, let's get to it. All right, guys, this here is the scene. We have a simple house. We have the road itself, in which we're going to put our asphalt material. It's got a curve. We have some concrete curbs that I downloaded from the Megascans website. And the entire scene is lit up with the V-Ray HDRI, a V-Ray dome light with an HDRI, sorry. And I have a separate video on my channel that explains how I light up my scenes if you're interested on seeing that. Let's take a look at the material. This is the final material that I ended up using for the road. It seems complex, but it's really not. It's just a mixture, or a blend rather. Here's the blend of these three materials here. Two for the main asphalt, one for the white lines, and they're just all blended together. And then these down here are just the wet mask and the displacement. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna deconstruct this material, how I arrived here. And I'm gonna show you some of the basics on how to build a material like this. So first of all, where do I find my textures? Well, we know there's plenty of textures online to find. I specifically like this website, textures.com. They have a huge library and collection. I am not sponsored by this website, by the way, but they do have very good textures of PBR scans, of 3D scans, and under asphalt, you'll find a number of good sets here that come with the diffuse, the normal, the height, the AO, etc. So what I did is I chose a couple of these, and I have the textures imported here. Okay, so let's go ahead and replicate the foundation material base 1. So let's bring in a V-Ray material. Let's call it base A, just to differentiate it from the original material. And let's bring in that same texture that I used. So I'm going to just copy this over, shift and drag. And as I mentioned, this texture is just one that I purchased from textures.com. You could just find textures online. There's multiple areas where you could do that, as I had already mentioned. So what I did here, you'll see, I have 2 color correction nodes to create a dark and bright and light version. So let's bring a color correction node. Let's plug it on here, and let's make this advanced and make this set 2 for contrast, and that makes a lighter version of this texture. And let's hold shift, drag, and copy, and let's make this a darker version. Let's say 0.9. So now I have a light version and a dark version, and the reason for this is I want to create areas of the asphalt that are gonna simulate dirty areas, and specifically I'm going to do this, make it so that it's dirty where it meets the curb, because that's typically where the more dirtier areas of the street happens. And to do this, I'm going to use a composite map. So let's bring in a composite map, and here it is. If you are familiarized with the way layers works in Photoshop, then you'll be familiarized with how the composite node works in 3D Studio Max. You just bring in different layers, and then you could set their style. You could multiply, overlay, screen, etc. Very similar to how you do in Photoshop. And this is very useful because you could do it straight from Max. You don't have to take it into Photoshop and do it by hand. So let's add our light layer, our light version to layer 1, and then our dark version to layer 2. Now we got to tell V-Ray where I want each to occur, where I want the light, where I want the dark. Specifically, I want the dark to happen, like I mentioned, where it meets the curb. And to do this, I'm going to use a V-Ray distance texture. So V-Ray distance text. And this is a handy little tool to accomplish that. And let's see how it works. Let's do this. Let's create a new material just to see a diffuse slot. And let's apply this material to our road. Our road, by the way, is already mapped with a standard UVW map. And let's do this. Under objects, we're going to tell it what objects we want the V-Ray distance text to base itself off. So I'm going to add the curb, and I'm going to add the grass surface. On your case, whatever object is touching your road, that's what you want to select, because that's where your mask is going to begin, where V-Ray distance text is going to begin the mask. And let's set it to happen 24 inches or 24 units, so if you use centimeters or inches, off of the curb. And let's swap the colors, the near and far color, because I want the near color, since this is a mask, to be white and the far color to be black. So let's see what this looks like. All right, so as you can see, the V-Ray distance text generated a nice mask off of the curb. It shows white that gradually tapers off until it hits black 24 units, or in my case 24 inches from that contact where the road meets the curb. And this is excellent to create the mask that I'm looking for. Now let's say I want to break this up a little bit, because I don't want it to be such a uniform white line. For that, we could use a grunge map. If you don't have one, you could use a noise map or any kind of noise map that you might have. I used this one here. So this is the standard grunge map, and I'm going to apply it to the distance texture. And so you see what happened was that the mask was broken up so that it's not so uniform, so a little bit more realistic as to what would happen in real life. I believe I had tiled this, changed the tiling on this. Yeah, increased the tiling. You could play with the tiling to make it however seems right to you. In my case, 3 and 3 seem just right. And so now we have a mask that we could use to tell V-Ray where we want the dark and the light area of the asphalt. So let's go ahead and do that. We don't need this material anymore. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use this V-Ray distance text as a mask. So we plug it into the layer 2 mask on the composite. And we're going to get the composite, put it on the diffuse slot of base A, and then put that material on the road. And here it is. So what you see is the dark version of the asphalt is going to be wherever the mask was white. In this case, it gives the illusion, the appearance, that the road gets darker as it gets to the edge where it meets the curb. And that's exactly what I was looking for. So perfect. So let's continue working on this material. Let's go ahead and set it so that it has the correct reflections. So we know that reflections are always going to be pure white. We control the reflection of the glossiness through the glossiness slot. I still see people playing with this color here to control reflection, and that's not the right way. If you want to physically correct based material, you're going to set this to white and use the glossiness slot to control the reflection. So let's do that. Let's see how I did it over here. I had this texture here to control the reflection. So let's do this. You could tell here the road right now looks like it's wet because I have the color on white and I have no glossiness set. So let's hook this up to the reflection glossiness slot, and let's change this to V-Ray specular. And that gives us an idea of how this material is affecting the reflection, how this texture rather is affecting the reflection on the material. So what we could then do is play with the output of this texture to, there we go, to increase the brightness and therefore affect the reflective qualities of that texture. And I'm starting to like what I see here, probably a little bit more. Something like that. Asphalt is pretty reflective, especially if it's kind of smooth. All right, so that's good. Now let's go ahead and add, let's work on the bump. So for that, we used a V-Ray normal bump, and V-Ray normal map rather. And whenever we have a normal map, we have to bring in a V-Ray normal map node. We can't just hook up the normal map straight to the bump slot. We have to hook it up to the V-Ray normal map node. Make sure that your normal map filtering is off, so it's at none. And make sure that your main materials bump slot is at 100. That way we control the bump through the node and through the map itself. So let's put this over here. Let's organize this a bit. And this goes to the bump slot. And there we see the result. Now we could add this as well to the same texture from the reflection I'm going to use for the bump slot on the Vray normal map. Let's lower this a bit so that it focuses more on the normal map itself. And there you go. Yeah, I like it. So now we have this material, the foundation, base A done. We have some nooks and crannies. We got some dirt on the edge. And this is a good start. Now what I'm going to do is create a second material just the way I created this first one. And we're going to call that base B. So let's do that. All right. So base B will be the equivalent of base 2 here. And we're going to use the exact same method that we used to create base A. So base B. And let's bring in some of these textures. Now, it's the same process. The only difference is I'm using textures from a different set of these here from textures.com. So I just have 2 of these sets, and I'm using the appropriate textures from each set to create 2 different materials using the same techniques though. So let's go ahead and set base B up. Make sure the reflection is at pure white. Make sure the map bump is at 100 because we're going to control it through the bump slots. All right, so let's bring in the texture, which is the diffuse texture, which is this one, and it's going to be the exact same method that I used for the original material. We got a light, we got a dark version, and we're going to hook that up to the diffuse slot. And we're going to use the same Vray distance texture to add the mask so that it creates the dirt along the edge where the road meets the curb. And that should be it. Now let's do the reflection. I'm just copying over from the original material because we've already went through how to do this. So in this case, I think I'm just going to bring in this texture here for the reflection. And I'm going to control it through the through its curves. So reflection, glossiness, and let's apply this material to the surface. And let's see what this looks like so far. Let's see. All right, so here's the new material thus far. And let's take a look at the speculars so I could analyze its reflection. All right, it's a bit too reflective. So I'm going to adjust the texture here. Maybe I should use an output. Let's use an output. So it's instead of controlling or changing the texture itself, I'm going to control the output amount here on a separate node. So to not change this texture. And let's do it here. So let's make it a little bit less reflective, which means darkening up the image also a little bit more even, more uniform. Something like that, probably still a little bit too reflective here. Now we're talking. A little bit more here. All right, see what that looks like. Okay, perfect. Now let's add a bump to the material. Now in this case, I didn't have a normal map. So instead, I have this texture here that will simulate the bump. And let's use a Vray color to bump node. So what this essentially does, it creates a normal map out of a regular, sort of works like a normal map, out of a regular bump map. And we can control how much it bumps here. I have the height at 1 inch. Let me see how much I used originally. Originally I used half an inch, so let's do that. Let's go to our bump, our Vray color to bump, and under height, I'm gonna make it half an inch. And make sure our surface has the material. And let's see what that looks like. There we go. All right, so now we see this secondary material, base B, works very much like the first material, and it's got a nice bump, nice reflection levels. It's a little bit dirty as it gets to the edge. Perfect. All right, now let's discuss how we could blend these two materials onto this one surface. So I got my two materials, base A and base B. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a V-Ray blend map to essentially mix these two materials onto the road. So here it is. I got my V-Ray blend, and here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put it over here. I'm gonna put my base A as my base material, and for my coat material, I'm gonna put this on coat 1. All right. So now we gotta tell V-Ray blend how to mix these two materials, and for that, as usual, we're gonna use some kind of noise map or grunge map, whatever you have access to. Oh, and if you don't have a grunge map, I can recommend this one from 3D Collective. Their dirt mask or dirt textures pack. It's really great. That's where I'm getting my grunge maps from, and it's totally worth its weight in gold. If you do this for a living, I highly recommend it. So let's get this grunge map right here, bring it over. And let's set this as the blend. So what this grunge map is gonna do is it's gonna tell this V-Ray blend map how to combine these two materials. So wherever there's white, we'll have the material B, and wherever there's black, we'll have material A, base A. So now I've already mapped this this road, but if you want to see how this would look like, we can just create a new material, put it on the diffuse slot, put it on the road, and render. Let's see what this grunge map, how this translates onto the surface. There it is. So you see we have pockets of black and mostly white, and I thought that worked well for my purposes. I wanted mostly more of one material than others. If you select different grunge maps or noise maps, it'll determine where each material goes. So now that we know what that looks like, let's do this. Let's hook this back up onto our blend slot. And so now this mask is going to determine how V-Ray is going to combine these two materials, and let's see what that looks like. There it is. So as you can see, we have some areas that have the base B material and other areas that have the base A material. And the result is that it breaks up that uniformity that you would have if you were just using one material. So by using two materials and blending them, it creates more variety, and therefore it tends to simulate real life better, and it gets rid of some of the tiling look that you would otherwise have. So I like what this looks like. It looks a little bit more like the aged asphalt that I'm going for, and we're getting there. So up next, what are we gonna do? Up next, we're gonna talk about how to add striping. I'm gonna put a stripe along the edge of this road here and in the center, and so let's do that. Okay. All right, so for the striping, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a mask, and as a matter of fact, I've already made one over in Photoshop. If you click on the link to the written tutorial version of this video on my blog, you'll find where you could download this. I created this myself, and what I did was I just painted some lines over in Photoshop, and I used different brushes to add some noise and make the striping look a little bit worn out. So this is going to be my mask. It's a simple 2-lane highway, 2 lines at either side, and striping in the middle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to map map that mask onto the road surface. And for that, I'm going to use spline mapping. The reason being is because my road is curved. If your road is straight, if you just have a straight line of road, you could use a simple box mapping, simple planar mapping. But since mine curves, I'm going to use a spline. And I've already created a spline on my surface. All I did was I selected that center line edges, and then under Edit Poly, I hit Create Shape off the surface, and it created the line to follow the contour of the turn. So, all right, let's do that then. Let's create a new material just so we can see what's going on here. And let's apply it to our surface. Make sure that it says Show Shaded Material. Perfect. And here's what we're going to do. Since we already have our original material, our asphalt, mapped onto this, and I don't want to disturb that since it looks pretty good. I don't want to disturb this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map this on a separate channel. I'm going to map it on the channel number 2. All right, so I changed map channel to 2. I'm going to add a unwrap UVW modifier. Let's see if we can find it. Here it is. All right, I'm going to select all of the polygon faces. I'm going to set the map channel to 2 because remember the stripes are going to be mapped in channel number 2, so it not disturb the original asphalt mapping. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Open UV Editor, and I'm going to select the mask. There it is. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use that spline to map that mask on there. So go here to spline mapping under the wrap category. Pick spline. I'm going to select the spline that I generated to follow that contour. I'm going to make it planar. I'm going to select fit, and I'm going to hit commit. So now I have that spline as a basis for the mapping. So I'm going to come back here to the edit UVWs, and as from what I could tell here, it's got to be rotated. So I'm going to rotate this like so, and I'm going to fit it all onto the texture by hitting Pack Custom. All right. So now we're starting to see that it's following the curvature of the road. We're getting close to what we want here. So let's do this. Let's make it so that the material covers, or the polygons cover the entire material. Let's select some of these and straighten these out a bit. This top one here, straighten that out. Straighten this out. Let's straighten this out here. All right, I think that'll work there. And now what we're gonna do to control how many lines there are or how it tiles, I'm gonna do that straight from the material itself. So go to the texture, and under tiling, you turn off the edges. All right, so under tiling here, just gonna increase the tiling, and that will just tile the map over and over until we get the desired result, which is going to be probably somewhere around there. I guess 5. 5 looks good. And now that's it. As you see, I've mapped the mask onto the surface, and it follows the road just as I wanted it. All right, so we're done with that. Let's close this up. Now we could use this mask. Don't need this material no more. We could use this mask to tell Vray where I want the splines to happen. All right, so how do we do that? Let's create, first of all, the striping material. And here is our striping material. Again, we're following the same procedure that we did to create these two materials. Have a diffuse, reflection, and bump, right? So Vray material, let's call this white stripes, just like the band. And we're going to, once again, use a texture. And what I did was I actually ended up using the same asphalt texture and using the 2 color correction nodes. I just made it, should have just copied these all over. I just made it bright enough that it looks white. So you see I got this texture and I brightened it up with color correction. by setting it to 5 under gamma contrast. And now it's almost white, but there's still some detail in there. It's not perfectly white, which is what you want, because nothing in real life, that surface is not really white. As a matter of fact, if you look at those stripes, typically they have cracks and crevices and stuff. And that's what I'm going to achieve now by using this this composite map. As soon as this is done auto saving. All right. Oh, here we go. All right. So what I did here was I used a composite map along with, here we go. All right, I see what I did here. Okay, so we have the white version of the asphalt going to layer 1, the dark version going to layer 2, and all I want to tell Vray is where to put the dark version. The dark version will only occur where those cracks are. So what I did was I went to the internet, and once again I found a texture that looks like a cracked surface, like this. And using an output modifier, I increased its contrast so that the whites are whiter and the darks are darker. And what that does is it creates a mask that's going to tell Vray now where to add these cracks in the striping to make them look worn out. So let's add this to the diffuse slot. Let's see what else I did. Oh, as typical, let's make sure our reflection is all the way to white. Let's add our bump to 100. And for the bump slot, same thing I did last time. Vray color to bump. Let's make this over here to the bump slot. And for the output for the reflection, let's do it from scratch. We'll play with it. Output. I use the same texture right here for the reflection. Let's hook it up to the reflection glossiness. And possibly those stripes tend to have a little bit of shine to them. So let's make them a little bit shiny. They do it on purpose to be reflective so that they're highly visible. Something like that for now. Okay, so now I have my preliminary white striping material. So now what I want to do is I want to use this mask to blend it in our original material. Here's our original Vray blend that blended the first 2 asphalt materials. It's using this grunge here to mix these 2 materials. I'm going to use a second coat here. I'm going to tag my white striping material to the second coat. So then now it appears here. And let's move this out of the way, organize this somewhat. I'm going to use my striping mask as the mask for this white striping material. So now wherever there is the white on this mask, it'll show this material. And then wherever there's black, it'll have these 2 materials here. Let's see if it's true. Let's go ahead and apply this material, this Vray blend over to our surface and re-render. There it is. Yep. So as you can see, the line, the striping has been added. I don't like how the cracks spread here. The cracks seem to be a little bit too big. So let's do this. Let's maybe increase the tiling somewhat. 3. Oh, or the Vray color to bump. Let's drop this. Yeah, there you go. Something like ½ an inch instead, maybe. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so as you can see, now we have the stripe going along the road. Perfect. Now, let's say I want to add a little bit more detail. I want to make that line kind of all bump up. Normally, this is an epoxy that's painted onto the asphalt surface. There's an option here called, let's see if I could find it, Vray bump material. Here we go. Vray bump material. Let's move this over to not get confused. This is our old reference material. This is our new one that we're using. So with this V-Ray bump material, I can hook this up, our material, to the base, and I could add further bump, control the bump further with a mask. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this mask here to the new bump slot. Excuse me, to the new bump slot, to raise that stripe a little bit up, or give it the appearance, the illusion of it being raised up, and therefore giving it some depth, some thickness. There you go, not bad. Although it will help if I actually apply the material to the surface. All right. Now we're talking. There we go. Okay. Let's play with this a little bit. 15 maybe. Okay. There we go. So now it appears that that line has been painted onto the surface. There's some thickness to it. And we're going to further modify that now by adding a displacement map. So let's go ahead and work on our displacement. All right, guys. So for our displacement, it's going to be the same concept. I'm going to use a composite of two maps that I downloaded online. This one here, which is a height map, so it's a little bit blurry. You don't want your displacement to be too grainy, because for the smaller fine details, we're using a bump map. For the bigger details, we use our displacement. And then this second material here, which has a bit more, or second texture rather, has more cracks and stuff. And I'm combining these two by using a composite. And I'm gonna make the second one a, let's use average. There we go. So that I blend the two textures together, and let's apply that to a V-Ray displacement modifier, which I already have one on my surface here. What I did was I used 2D mapping. I know everybody uses 3D mapping, but you know what? 2D mapping works well sometimes, a little bit easier. To me, sometimes the render's a little bit faster. So I'm gonna keep 2D mapping for this purpose here. I'm gonna put this composite map onto the text map, and I'm gonna leave it at 1/2 inch up and 1/2 inch shifted down, so that the whole surface kind of just stays where it is. And let's just see what that looks like. So bring this over here. Perfect. Okay, so adding that little bit of detail with the displacement mapping just adds those extra little subtleties that makes the surface appear a little bit more realistic. There's a couple more bumps and nooks and crannies and shadows and stuff that just adds for more realistic view on your material. And I mean, that's pretty much it. We have a material that renders pretty nicely. Either way, however you look at it. Here's the separate camera view. We got the dirt going along the edges here. We have the stripe that's worn out pretty nicely. We have asphalt that looks pretty bumpy and old. And that's, I like where it's going. Now let's say we want to add some water, or make the surface wet rather. Let's say we want to make some puddles and stuff. It's very typical on some of the renderings. So how do we do that? Well, one way would be to just come in here and modify all these materials, glossiness, go into the glossiness maps, reflection glossiness, and messing with them so that it's brighter and increase the reflection. But rather what I'm gonna do, and I have one here done already, I've created another composite, and using the same methods that I've already described, I have a composite map here with a grunge map that kind of looks like puddles. So I've selected a grunge map here that kind of looks like puddles, and I've modified the output to have a little bit less contrast. And then I used the V-Ray distance text again to simulate the areas closer to the curb being more wet, because I want water typically accumulates in the surfaces and the edges of the road, right? Where it meets the curb. And so I'm using that to lighten up the mask as it gets closer to the curb. So what I'm gonna do, instead of messing with each material's glossiness texture, I'm going to create a coat reflective material and just tag it onto each of these three main materials. I have base A, base B, and the white stripes, okay? So here's what we do. We go to base A, we will go under coat parameters, we'll go to coat amount, make it 1, right? And coat glossiness is where we're gonna use this mask that we just created for our puddles. So I'm gonna tag this here to coat glossiness, which is right there, okay? We're gonna do the same thing for base B for all our materials. So base B, we're gonna go to coat parameters, coat amount. We're gonna give it a reflective coat, so put it at 1. And again, we're gonna tag this onto the coat glossiness. And finally for our stripes, we're gonna make it coat amount 1 and tag this to coat glossiness as well. So I have the same mask tagged tagged into the coat glossiness slot of each of the three main materials that are blended with a coat amount of 1. And what I'm gonna do now, make it 1.3, which is the coat IOR, which is the IOR of water typically. It's not really a big deal, but because I'm anal like that, I like having the right details. All right, so this mask is gonna control how glossy it is, which I've already set up, and we could tweak further once we start rendering. So let's see what this looks like now. Not bad. So we see it's got some reflections here. Let's change the camera. Here we go. All right, so you see by adding a coat over each of the materials and just using a map to determine, to mess with its glossiness, it's like you're adding a coat of water over the surface. And we can increase how reflective it is by just making this output brighter or darker, and that will increase how wet the road looks. Right now I've made it more uniformly white, so the road looks more uniform. If I increase the contrast, it's gonna look more like it's got puddles, because I've made the map have higher contrast between black and white, so it's more puddles. And if I wanna make it just uniformly more wet, I would just increase the darker areas. So in this method, I could control the appearance of wetness on the road very easily with this one mask, instead of having to go through all three materials, modifying each one. So I find this works well, and the result is, it's nice. I think we might need a little bit more reflective properties, and maybe you could go in and tweak the diffuse a little bit to make the road a little bit darker. Normally when roads get wet, they darken a bit, but there you go, guys. That's really it, guys. I mean, using these same techniques, you can, further improve the image. You can add some tire marks. You can add some imperfections in the road, some cracks, some manholes. It's really nothing to it, and you could scatter some leaves, scatter some stones. It's exactly what I did here to increase some of that realism. All the detail that you add will pay for itself at the end when you render out the image, and it looks nice. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you learned some tools that are useful. Some of this, like the V-Ray distance text, or the composite map, and some techniques, some little tips and tricks that hopefully you found useful. If you did, let me know. Give me a shout out. If you have any questions, drop them below. And as usual, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please stick around. I'll keep posting videos soon whenever I have a chance. And if you have any suggestions as well, I'm always available. Don't forget to visit my blog. I have a written version of this tutorial. You'll find other cool stuff there as well. So once again, thank you guys. Till next time.